Welcome, everybody, to the premiere of Chatterday Night Live. It's a new show. Essentially, it's a call-in show, but I was getting a little bit bored of the name Israel Palestine call-in show. So I went over to ChatGPT and said, "Give me a name for a call-in show." Give me some suggestions. Chatterday Night Live was pretty clever. I then asked it to make me a graphic. It made me a graphic. It took a few tries. The graphics aren't always what you want, but the thumbnail of this video and the name are both created by AI. So shout out ChatGPT. And with that, also shout out Tyler. Wait, hold on. Oh, feedback. I didn't realize that. Okay, we're good now. And with that, a shout out also to our patrons, especially our visionary members. Those are Renee Gordon, Adam Becker, Neve Goldstein, David Edwards, and Jules Tahakashi. If anybody wants to support the show, you could see how to do that in the description. So the format for this is quite simple. Anybody can join. You can share your thoughts, ask questions, give feedback. The topic could be Israel Palestine, but it could be beyond. We will expand to other topics. We like to talk about topics that are A, important, B, interesting, C, potentially controversial. The format is let's have a calm and respectful conversation on contentious issues, whether that's racism, whether that's Israel Palestine, whether it's U.S. politics, immigration. The floor is open for anybody who wants to share. I'm dropping a link. We are going to have our chief analyst, Tal Hagen, join us in a moment. And then from there, we'll bring on some other people. So thank you all for joining. Tal, I'm bringing you on.
Hey,
Tal, how are
everyone.
you?
Good. It's good to be back. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. So for those who don't know, Tal recently got married. Mazal Tov, Tal.
Thank you.
Kat, maybe you give Tal a little Mazal Tov. So yeah, happy to hear your thoughts. Maybe I'll share some updates because things are not going well. Things are not going well. It seems like Israel is in a very tough place, and that we are losing the war, which honestly is not surprising. Poor leadership, lack of vision will generally lead to these results. But essentially, where we're at right now is that the Biden administration has taken a very tough stance. I would say, the toughest stance against Israel that any U.S. president has ever taken. And he said, quote, the humanitarian crisis is unacceptable and demands an immediate ceasefire. Israel responded to this by taking some measures to try to have continued support from the U.S. for the war in Gaza. What they did was they opened the Erez crossing to allow aid in. Aid will also come in through the Ashdod port. And, Israel's been saying for months now that they've been doing the maximum to allow aid in, and now we see two measures that they have not been doing. So they have not been doing the maximum. And the humanitarian crisis in Gaza very well could have been avoided. Also, on the very first days of the war, Israel announced they're not going to let any food or water into Gaza, which certainly seemed like a measure of collective punishment that would harm the general populace more than Hamas, and that clearly seems to be the case. So this was all avoidable. The IDF also fired division commanders, two division commanders, and reprimanded the head of IDF Southern Command. I think this is for excesses in, let's describe it as shoot first, ask questions later, which has been a topic of discussion on this channel for quite some time. We could also go back to the debate I had with Joseph Cohen, which my primary point was whether it's through airstrikes or through individual soldiers shooting, there's a level of recklessness and carelessness for civilian lives. If there's a chance that it's Hamas or a chance that Hamas might be killed as well, then there's a disregard for what civilians may be killed. And this has been clear to many from very early on. I think now it's becoming clear to most people. Recently, there was the tragic incident where the World Central Kitchen Organization, which is an organization that was brought in to replace UNRWA to help feed Gazans, they were struck. Israel investigated it and said there was a grave mistake, and they apologized. But the only reason Israel had to come out and investigate and apologize is because they were humanitarian workers. Think about how many times this has happened with just a car of people driving that were misidentified as Hamas, or there was some suspicion that they would be Hamas, or they were perhaps all military aged men, so shoot first, ask questions later. This has happened likely many hundreds of times, whether through air strikes, drone strikes, or soldier shooting. It just doesn't go reported because it's just regular civilians being killed. It's true, war is ugly, but there's still a higher degree of care that can be taken. And I think that it's perfectly legitimate to condemn Israel for not taking the highest degree of care possible. And to do so is by no means accusing Israel of blood libel. I see people all over Twitter, whenever Israel is accused of killing somebody intentionally, they say that's blood libel, that's anti-Semitic. It's true that blood libel is an anti-Semitic trope. That is true. But Israel, the nation, accusing them of killing people either intentionally or recklessly is absolutely not blood libel. It's something that every sovereign nation should have the right to accuse of, without being accused in return of some form of group hate. And I'll say I'll leave it with that. That's kind of where we're at. We don't know what the next few weeks will look like, but the chance of Hamas being defeated are very, very low. I think we need to start being honest about that, and we need to start looking what happens, how do we live side by side with not only Hamas but a population that has just as much right to live on the land as the Israelis living there. What does that look like? How do we move forward towards a better future? So we'll talk about that more. But Tal, happy to hear your analysis, and if you disagree with anything, obviously let us know.
Yeah, so of course there's been a lot going on. When it comes to losing the war, I think also first we need to define what are the objectives of the state of Israel in this war as a country, not what individuals are saying or what different politicians and leadership want to occur, but the main targets was to dismantle Hamas, to eliminate Hamas and their military capabilities, and do everything that they can in their power to bring back the hostages. Now, the first goal doesn't make sense militarily. It's not a concept, for example, in my degree right now is Armed Forces and Security Studies. And right now we're learning about national security policy, and the whole concept of, which is really interesting to hear, is that the whole concept of destroying another government, destroying a people, destroying Hamas's capabilities as a military group, doesn't exist in military terms. What you can do is destroy 50 to 60 to 70% of their military capabilities, and that makes it impossible for them to actually do any damage to you. But when it comes to actually destroying Hamas, which is beyond just the military, it's a governance, it's a people, it's those who control and have a lot of support, not just in the Gaza Strip, but also now in the West Bank, much growing in the West Bank. And so the question is what have you actually destroyed when you're saying you're destroying Hamas? Now, maybe they could get to a point where they have full control over the Gaza Strip, but full control over the Gaza Strip with pockets of Palestinian militant groups all around, and you would have to essentially install a complete military occupation on the entire Gaza Strip in order to stop the current control that they have. You would have to do this simultaneously while the militant groups within the West Bank are currently garnering more and more support not just amongst the civilian population, but they're also getting more and more funding. They're becoming much more, well armed and well equipped. Their training is still lacking, and that showcases in their skirmishes with IDF troops. While they are able to confront the IDF in many instances, there's very few IDF casualties. And when you watch videos of the IDF movements, anyone who would be, for example, well trained against IDF forces would be able to most likely shoot these troops. Again, this is based on videos and what I've seen, not personal experience. And so we're currently at a stage in the West Bank where they're becoming much more well armed, but they're not as well trained. And the second is the hostages. Now, this is something that I don't agree with at all. I think that having any type of conversation when it comes to Rafah, and getting the hostages home and taking over Rafah and the entirety, so to speak, of the Gaza Strip, they're not compatible. You don't get either. You either get full control of the Gaza Strip militarily, or you get the hostages back. Because one way that we know that this is true is that there has been a war for roughly 6 months now, a little bit less than 6 months. The IDF has been within Gaza, and they have only managed to release one hostage, which was an IDF soldier. And that was it. In every other instance that the IDF attempted to release hostages, not just the hostages were killed in the event, either due to the gunfire between the Hamas militants and the IDF, or an IDF crossfire, or the Hamas militants did it on purpose to stop them from being kidnapped. But not only were the hostages killed, but also a few IDF soldiers in almost every single one of these instances. So we've paid more IDF soldiers' lives in the attempt to garner hostages, which have never been successful. When it comes to Rafah, it's going to be the exact same story. Because wherever these hostages are, we know that they've been kept in refugee camps. We know that they've been kept in schools, private residencies, in tunnels. This is based on the testimonies of the hostages themselves, who have talked about where they were and where they were kept. There's no way to know where they exactly are, and it's pretty obvious the IDF doesn't know either, or by now we would have had a little bit more success. There actually was, I think, in Rafah, 2 more hostages that were released by the IDF in an operation, correct?
I believe it was 1 or 2.
I think it was 2.
We could look it up.
Yes. Also, just Luca said in the chat, there were 2. So there have been 3 hostages that they've been managed to do, which is amazing. But that's the minority. I mean, we managed in a deal to release over 100. And now you could say the reason that there's a disdain also, this is now going more to Israeli society, as in what do we do? So there's 2 sides to this coin. There's the free the hostages side of the coin, which is that these were Israeli citizens, Israeli soldiers and civilians. They, especially the civilians, that they believe that the IDF would protect them in their time of need, and that we as a country need to ensure everything we can to bring them home. And so if that means a hostage deal, so be it, as long as we can get our people back. The other side of the coin isn't saying that they hate the hostages or that they don't want them released, but that they believe that by releasing the hostages, you're essentially going over again the same paradigm that we had with Gilad Shalit. Gilad Shalit was a soldier that was kidnapped in 2006 by Al-Qassam, the military wing of Hamas, and he was kept for, I think, 6 years, 5 or 6 years, and he was released to Israel alive in return for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. Some of them were regular detainees. Others had blood on their hands, who had committed attacks against both Israeli troops and civilians. And so this set a precedent for many of these Palestinian groups that it is a priority to not only kidnap an IDF soldier as a body, but also alive, because we can get a lot more of our people back in a negotiation. And so if, so to speak, Israel agrees to giving back Palestinian detainees or any type of agreement for the hostages, we're setting the stage for this to happen again in the future. That's that perspective. And so you have these 2 conflicting narratives on what to do. They're saying we should just, the hostages, there's nothing we can do. We should sacrifice the hostages in order to take over the entire Gaza Strip and destroy Hamas. And the other side is saying that first we have to have a deal with Hamas. We need to get back our hostages, and then we can talk about what to do next. And so that's really I think the main thing that has been really hard for the Israeli society, with a lot of the protests and, you could say, tensions between the different groups on how to move forward. But regarding Gaza, I think something that's important to know and not fall into this trap is that when we look at a lot of the areas that were controlled by or are controlled by Israel, it doesn't mean that Israel actually has control of them. There's been multiple areas where the IDF came in, took over, and then had to retreat, not because they weren't able to control it, but they don't have the manpower. I mean, the IDF also needs to have its troops stationed not just in the west, not just within the Gaza Strip, but also on the perimeters of its borders. It has to also have troops stationed now up north, and with Syria and Lebanon due to tensions up there, and have additional troops in the West Bank to contend with the different militia groups, and also in proper Israel for other issues that could arise. And so you have, and also now in Eilat, so much more the defense and navy, but still. And the point is that it seems that the IDF simply doesn't have the manpower to control every single part of Gaza. That's why just yesterday we had rockets being fired into Israel from northern Gaza, from northern and central Gaza these past few days, from areas that they shouldn't be able to fire from anymore because we took control of them. And I think that it's also kind of setting the stage that the only way for the IDF to have full control over the Gaza Strip is a military occupation. But the question is that does even Israel have the capabilities for a military occupation? Because even at this point, it doesn't really have the capabilities to succeed in all of Gaza. What it looks like they're trying to do, and now this is based completely on my own speculation on what I'm viewing, is that you have the new road that the IDF has essentially built in the center of Gaza that splits the north from the south. It's very much a built-up road. This isn't a road that's built for a day or two and then left alone. This is a road that they put a lot of construction into it. They're building small bases along the road. What I assume that the IDF wants to do, or the IDF as in the current government in power, is they want to install a military occupation on northern Gaza. And on southern Gaza, they want to install a militia group that's going to be in opposition to Hamas. So that's why probably right now they're most likely, we've seen a lot of chatter in the news about the fact that small groups in Gaza, different tribes, have been asked by the IDF to, giving them weapons, giving them munitions, the IDF making sure that aid goes to certain groups in order for it to be distributed by them. And so what I think that the IDF wants, I think what it originally wanted was that people would voluntarily, which is in phrasing here as in what you define as voluntarily, would voluntarily leave to Egypt, because then it would make it much, much easier for the IDF to take over this territory if it didn't have to deal with the civilian population. But because Egypt has completely stopped that in its tracks by building a massive border defense on its border, and the IDF isn't going to now break through that, as far as I can see. So the best case scenario for them at the moment with the current administration is to have a militia, a pro-Israel militia, run southern Gaza that will be in charge of the civilian population, and northern Gaza will become an occupied territory, essentially similar to the West Bank by the state of Israel. That's the direction we're headed. When it comes to why we haven't entered Rafah up until now, like properly entered and invaded, like we said we would. The IDF said that it would in the beginning of March, didn't it? And I think heavily is due to exactly what Adar said in the beginning of the live stream, is that Israel doesn't have the support it once had in the beginning of this war. It's lost a lot of the narrative of, it doesn't matter if it's legitimate or not. We're not talking about if it's legitimate that the IDF does this or not legitimate. From a perspective of narratives and garnering political support, Israel's lost it. I mean, the fact that at a UN Security Council, that we have to have a ceasefire, that the United States abstained from the vote, is really significant, that they didn't veto that and help Israel. And now we have the UK talking about potentially trialing Israeli soldiers for war crimes. You have the Americans talking about the fact that they might have to change their policy in the Middle East. And they were very, very harsh against the state of Israel in regard to what happened with the convoy of civilian health workers. And so all of this is really putting pressure on the state of Israel. And I don't think that they have the political support at all in order to actually go into Rafah and take it over. They might be able to militarily, but then they will most likely lose the funding that they need in order to rearm units and their weaponry. And if they don't have that, then it'll be much easier for the adversaries in the region to attack. And so I think that Israel's kind of in this placement where it wants to go ahead with its policy, which is take over Afir and then the rest of the southern Gaza Strip, but it can't because it doesn't have the political support that it needs.
Thank you, Tal. Great analysis. Social Surrealist will bring you on in just a few minutes. We have a few questions that I do want to get to. So Daba23 asks, how is Israel losing the war? Isn't Hamas cornered in Rafah? So I think Tal answered that partially. Just to expand on that, Israel can go into Rafah and take it over. Hamas will not be defeated. The war will not end. As we see that Hamas still has capabilities to have an effective insurgency in central and northern Gaza, Israeli soldiers are still being killed in central and northern Gaza. This is after we, quote unquote, defeated Hamas there. This is very complicated urban warfare that it's not even clear that even holding Gaza for years would show the end, would be the end of Hamas. They could operate through tunnels. They're very tight, tightly built neighborhoods. Taking over Rafah would not defeat Hamas. I know a lot of people are saying that. I also think that Bibi very well may use this as like, we could have won, but America didn't let us. If only we could go into Rafah. That's not what it's going to take to defeat them. We're talking about years of holding Gaza, and it's not even clear that would be effective. And I think, looking at the U.S. in Iraq is a perfect example. There's the famous, Bush making the speech with the mission accomplished banner in the background after, what was it, like just a month of war, and then and very few U.S. soldiers were killed actually taking over Iraq. But then in the years to come, thousands were killed trying to hold Iraq. So we're nowhere near being to the point where we need to be, where there's no more insurgency in Gaza, not even close. And we need to start asking ourselves, what have we actually gained if we didn't release the hostages, or not most of them, if we've lost already 250 soldiers, and we've killed well over 10,000, probably over 20,000 Palestinian civilians at this point, and we're more isolated than ever before internationally. What have we achieved? It seems like where we're at now, we could have actually accomplished so much more with far less death using simply diplomacy. Luke Mesmer says, killing intentionally or recklessly are completely different things. I would agree that they're different. I don't think they're completely different. There's a certain point where reckless killing is not so morally different than intentional killing. But I agree there's definitely a nuance there. And then Luke goes on to say the former can be blood libel when the accusation is made with no evidence. So the challenge here is that it's very hard to prove someone's intention, especially in with the chaos that comes with war. So there's been ample evidence of Palestinians being executed, whether it's waving white flags and being shot, which we have video evidence of, and multiple reports. So we already have evidence that some of this has happened. So for somebody to say, based on the evidence we've seen in the past, I no longer will give Israel the benefit of the doubt and will assume that they're doing things intentionally. Now, I think it's still better to not make assumptions when we don't know, but I don't think making that assumption is blood libel. I think people would make this assumption about any nation that had a similar track record, and that clearly wouldn't be blood libel. So Israel, being a Jewish state, should not have a special should not be in a special category where you're not allowed to accuse it of things that you're allowed to accuse other sovereign nations of. Yeah.
I just saw one question there that important.
Sure.
Is that it said, why Shepard asked, Todd didn't see any comments from you on the aid workers killed. So personally, just around that time is just when I got married. So I wasn't really on Twitter at all. So that's kind of the excuse, but I don't know whether or not that's really relevant for me to look at. I know that the IDF investigated, and there was also a few like very good, well done investigations against the IDFs and their claims. But if you think that I could add anything to that, then I'd be happy to look at what we currently have. But it seems like more like there's quite a lot of investigations already done on it. I don't think that I'd be adding much to that personally.
Cool. Social Surrealist, we're bringing you on. Welcome. Before we give you the floor, I just want to respond to Dabo one more time. So Dabo goes, but Hamas can't launch another October 7th right now or after invading Rafah. Isn't that the goal? So this is one of the stated goals, to stop Hamas from being able to do this again. But interestingly, we could have stopped Hamas from doing October 7th actually on October 8th by better defense and better security. It was a major failure, both military and intelligence failure, that allowed October 7th to happen. So there's a way to avoid that from happening that wouldn't require bloodshed, would just require better security and better defense. So we say we have the right to self-defense, but at what cost? And if there's a way to do it that will cause much less harm both to us and them, well, it's not hard to see why people would prefer that approach. Social, what's up, man?
What's up, guys? I'm glad to be on this panel of experts. I want to ask you guys if you hear me okay.
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll start off.
I would maybe put your camera down a little bit if you want
to. Maybe I'll adjust that while you guys are speaking. But anyway, what the question I was going to ask for Tal and Adar, you guys seem like smart dudes that can answer this pretty well. Let's say elections happen tomorrow, and Gantz wins, and he continues the war effort. What do you guys think will change as a result from that? As a result of like a center-left coalition in Israel?
I think that they would focus on, let's just say we're saying that they keep their promises and they actually try to say what they want to do, is they would focus mainly on a new deal regarding the hostages and trying to get them out. But the problem is that a lot of the demands at the moment from Hamas when it comes to the hostages are those of a winning side, which is really interesting. Usually when demands are made in regard to a truce or a ceasefire or the end of a conflict, then the winning side is the one who has all the power. And if you actually look at what Hamas is demanding, they're demanding a complete total end to the war in order to get the hostages back. In the beginning, they actually had a lot more deals that were a lot more fair, so to speak, as in the fact that it was like, okay, succession of conflict for a few days or release of a certain amount of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, and then we'll release the hostages. But in the recent deals that they've proposed for a ceasefire, what it really is proposing is an end to the conflict completely. They want complete succession of IDF forces in the Gaza Strip, continuous aid to be able to come in to help refurbish the Palestinian population for the losses, which is not a demand of a losing side at all, which is really interesting that they've taken that approach. So the question is that Gantz, of course, wouldn't accept these type of demands at all. It doesn't matter that he is on the opposite of Netanyahu. He's not that far to stop the war. That would be less political suicide. But I think maybe there could be a change in tune in terms of how Hamas is viewing it. The why Hamas has decided to go so strongly against Israel, because it knows that Netanyahu is never going to accept these terms. It's very similar to when people say, if Hamas wants to stop the war today, all they have to do is bring back the hostages and surrender, which in my eyes is a very dumb statement, because if Israel surrendered and gave up the entire land, there would also be an end to the war. There can always be a million ways to get the end of the war. The question is, do we get to the end of a war in a way that everyone wins or everyone can agree to? So when it comes to Gantz, I think that at the current moment, I don't think that he could do much of a change simply because of the demands by the opposition. But the question is that would those demands change if Netanyahu wasn't in power? And I don't know the answer to that.
Sorry, I'm just readjusting here. I obviously prefer Gantz. I think we got to get rid of Bibi. He's caused so much damage to Israel at this point. But it's not like Gantz is some revolutionary who's going to transform the country. And again, it's hard to know exactly what Gantz believes in and what he'll do. He's very much acted like a politician up until now. He hasn't been super clear about where he stands on issues. Like, he's not a super ideological guy. It doesn't seem to be the case. So when he's in power, what will he actually do? Will he be, you know, risk averse and pragmatic, perhaps, or will he all of a sudden have this revolutionary spirit and try to transform the country and solve the conflict? I'm not confident in the latter, but I think it's really just hard to know. It wouldn't be surprising if it's just more of the same. Yeah, it'll still be good to have him instead of Bibi, but the status quo very well may not change. Real quick, just to keep responding to questions. So Daba responds to Daba says that seems highly risky to me. Why should Israel tolerate a terrorist group on its border? This is in regards to my response that Israel could just be more defensive and not allow October 7th to happen. So I actually don't think that's actually highly risky. I think October 7th is entirely avoidable. We made huge mistakes that could be corrected and allow for there to never be an infiltration of thousands of militants into Israel's territory. That is something that we can achieve. And why should Israel tolerate a terrorist group on its border? Well, ideally, it shouldn't, but it's not like I think we have much of a choice, right? I don't really know if Hamas was easy to be defeated, we would have defeated them decades ago. The reason they're still in existence is because we haven't been able to destroy them, and we're still not able to. And also, it's beyond just an organization called Hamas. It's about an ideology that supports them. And this ideology is one that is prime for breeding in the environmental conditions that Palestinians are in. So you replace Hamas, you defeat Hamas. Who replaces them? It could be worse. Just to go to look back a little bit, Hamas used to be. In its early days, was very much supported and propped up by Israel as a resistance to the PLO. We said, okay, let's support this group to fight the PLO. And interestingly, it was the PLO that reformed and is now the more moderate faction, and Hamas is the one that we are fighting. So I don't think we have much of a choice. I think we need to really be creative, and if we haven't been able to defeat them militarily, which we've tried, let's try diplomatically, which we actually have not tried, not with them at least. And I know this is a radical position in Israeli society. What, negotiate with terrorists? Yeah. Who else are you going to negotiate with?
Something that I actually would push back on you, Adar. You want to say something, Social?
Well, okay, so I definitely want to let you speak, and you could definitely ask your question. But something I want to address is I think we need to restructure how we're kind of saying how to defeat Hamas. It's because I think in this war, it's not about whether or not it's possible to defeat Hamas as like an ideology or a political movement, but rather the cost of defeating Hamas. Because, if Israel were to spend millions, billions of dollars on aid, re-education, and militarily occupying the Gaza Strip, which would most likely result in many casualties, then maybe it's possible. And who knows for sure until somebody puts that resources in. That's happened in other like occupations, like in Japan and Germany. However, Israel, small country, Israel with also a smaller population, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually achieve something like that. And I think in this war, there's like this. I think this is a broader pattern of something that Israel shouldn't do. And this is by going to this war unilaterally, pretty much. I wish what they would have done on October 7th, on October 8th, is create kind of a coalition, people that will go into Gaza, get this done quickly, and then rebuild Gaza as it's done, and provide citizens with, I guess, an alternative to Israeli occupation and Israeli rule in their eventual future by providing them the prospect of a better life. So yeah, what's your like take on this position? What do you guys think should be the cost of defeating Hamas?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think we need to understand what that actually means to defeat them. Because if they're just replaced by someone worse, then are they defeated, or did they just take on a different form? Um, and Justino brings up a good point in the comments. All the focus on Hamas, but this ignores the increase of military action and violence against Palestinians. The West Bank, more than 8,000 arrests and 500 Palestinians killed since October 7th. So it's very easy to make Hamas seem like the boogeyman, and once they're gone, all will be good. But Hamas hasn't been in power, has actually never been in power in the West Bank, and it's not like the West Bank is thriving and we have peace and there's a sovereign Palestinian state where we're living together. So this whole idea that you defeat Hamas and all is good just doesn't seem grounded in reality. So, I'm not even sure. Like, we should take any. Like, I think the cost we should take is actually relatively low, because unless we have a clear plan for how to create a better future afterwards, and this leadership or Gaunt's leadership, I don't think have that vision to how to really change the status quo long term and get a true permanent ceasefire, which is peace, right? So, I don't. I think the cost we should accept is low unless it's clear that we can create a better situation and change the status quo permanently. And
So-
if we can't make that case, then I wouldn't support a high cost at all.
I have two responses that essentially go to both your questions and also the questions that are in the chat. One is that the main issue here is that the state of Israel does not have a long-term goal. It does not have a constitution. It does not have a real objective at what it wants to be, what type of country it wants to be, and that's why we always resort to the military policy of mowing the lawn. I'll explain that in a sec. And the second is that I think that I've noticed this a lot with this war, but I mean, it's going to happen with every single war, is that a lot of people don't understand that Hamas is a symptom and it's not the cause. And this doesn't come from this thing as in, oh, it's justified because of this violence or that violence. Is that there's a whole conflict beyond Hamas and Gaza that is constantly been raging on, and I've been talking about it for years on this channel as well, with the West Bank and Israel proper and the North and the South and all that. So the first part is that when you were talking about, for decades with Hamas, as Hamas was it was an Islamic charity. It slowly grew up. It became much more aggressive towards the state of Israel during the late 80s, early 90s, and then it started to resort to growing a more military resistance and attacking IDF troops and then civilians. And the IDF started to fight really, really harshly against them in the 90s. But it never really did anything about it. And then they were able to prop up a de facto government in the Gaza Strip and win the election, and have ever since controlled the Gaza Strip. Now, the Israeli military is incredibly powerful when it comes to actually being able to do a lot of damage. For example, when it goes into Jenin or Turkheim or these other areas, and it's essentially mowing the lawn, as in it takes out massive arrays of militant capabilities. I mean, it sometimes almost destroys the entire city. There was, I think, a massive raid in Jenin, I think about a year and a half ago, where almost the entire city was just all the main roads were destroyed, and it had gone arrested hundreds of people who were allegedly connected to these different militant groups and weapons and stuff like that. And the same thing with Gaza. I mean, when it comes to dealing with Gaza, of course, it took time to go into Gaza because Hamas has built up a massive tunnel system. And also, when you have urban combat and you have a lot of civilians in the way, it makes it much more difficult. But the real reason I think that Israel hasn't been able 6 months later to, defeat Hamas and take over the Gaza Strip is the same reason why all of these militant groups still exist in the West Bank, is because we don't know what we want as the end goal of this country. Do we want Israel to be to have sovereignty over all of what they consider, of what this government considers Israel, which is both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and the Golan Heights, and that means to eliminate every single adversary force within these areas? Or do we want this to simply keep the status quo and deal with what we have at the moment? Or do we want this to become a secular state? So then we have a two-state solution. So then we should be having peace negotiations with the Palestinians, but at the same time, we're building settlements because we believe that Jews have a right to live within this land. And so they should be able to build land and have homes there. But at the same time, this puts more and more chaos on eventual deals with the Palestinians. Then you have the Palestinian Authority, which on one hand has security coordinations with the IDF against militants, and on the other hand supports armed resistance against both civilians and military personnel of Israelis. And so it's all a mishmash of different ideologies and different perspectives and different policies. And so then you have the whole issue of mowing the lawn, which essentially means that every few years there's a war, we go in, we destroy whatever is near the border or near the area, and then we leave. So all that really happens is the other side gains experience in knowing how to combat IDF troops and another day to fight. And there's no end goal. Because if Israel decides to take over the Gaza Strip, they have to then decide, what does that then look like? Does it look like a military occupation? Do we annex the territory and then give 2 million Palestinians Israeli citizenship and create a huge demographic issue in the country with voting? And until Israel answers this question on what type of country it wants to be, we're always going to have this problem. Now, the second is regarding Hamas. It's the symptom and not the cause. Hamas, the Gaza Strip, what people define as terrorism, the attacks against our IDF troops, all of this is a symptom of a conflict that has been raging on for almost 100 years. It started with what we had with the Ottomans, then the Mandate, and then now present-day Israel. And it's evolved over those years. I think also something that's important to understand is that, something I've seen sometimes activists say is, well, Hamas didn't exist before the 80s, so what were the Israelis attacking then? Well, there was a different force that was attacking against Israel. It was the, as you said, Fatah and the guerrilla forces that were very, very much of a nuisance to the IDF and constantly had different reprisal attacks against IDF forces during those times. There was always different groups that were fighting, but again, all of these groups were a symptom of a major battle between different identities of. Now, some people see it as more religious, that it's more Judaism against Islam and who controls the Holy Land. Others see it as a battle of nationalism, of being Israeli and being Palestinian and who has to control this land. And others see it simply as circumstantial in that everyone's fighting for their share of the pie and the justification for their history. And so I think that when we're talking about like the West Bank, it is true that Hamas we're saying, why is the IDF in Lebanon or why is it in the West Bank? Because Hamas doesn't control there. Yes, because there's entirely different things going on at the same time as the war against Hamas that controls the Gaza Strip. And so that's something important to remember, that there's many different dimensions to this conflict than simply the one currently being focused on right now. Of course, it makes sense that we're focusing on it because we have a massive civilian death toll on our hands. And so that's currently the main focus. But there is an entire conflict and the repercussions of this conflict going throughout the entire land.
Yep. Well said, brother. I see that Wayne Feder here on Twitter disagrees with you. Well, Wayne, if you're still viewing, you're welcome to join the chat, the stream, to tell us why you disagree. It's always funny when somebody says, there's not one word you were saying is true. Okay, well, make a case, my guy. What an argument. Tal, you're wrong. I win. That's the state of
my issue is I said so much, I don't know which part is wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah. All of it, supposedly. So David Bow Wow, good to see you here. Also, I'm a supporter here on YouTube, so thanks for your support. David goes, you can't defeat an ideology with violence. It will just lead to more groups to form, especially now more than ever, the consequences of the war. Hamas was the least popular during the Oslo Accords when Palestinians had some form of hope, even if the Accords weren't perfect. It's true. They were the weakest then, and they're the strongest now. That's interesting. Tal, you said earlier that there's something you wanted to push back. So something I said they wanted to push back, or is that no?
Yeah, it was essentially that like I think that when you like the comments about they're not in the West Bank or that they haven't done much for decades, like there's much more to that, as in it's these one like
for sure.
Hamas is more of a symptom in terms. Hamas is a symptom of viewing armed attacks against the state of Israel as the right way to achieve their goals, whether that be religious, political, or ideological or whatever. And so Hamas is like the banner of that movement, but there's tons of different groups that are within this and that believe that that's the way forward.
Right.
of course, we've seen it on a very different level with the Israelis. I think after the second Intifada, which saw massive amounts of suicide bombings and civilian buses being blown up and civilian areas and stuff like that, the Israeli Jewish population moved far more to a much more violent right side, seeing that the only way to deal with the Palestinians is not through peace accords or not through diplomatic resolutions, but is to simply conquer the land and take it over and force them into submission, and that they will accept us one way or another. And October 7th did another flip of that as well. And same thing for the Palestinians, is in seeing that the aftermath of October 7th and what then happened in Gaza is once again also going to make a whole entire next generation of both Israelis and Palestinians in the same mindset that the only way forward is violence towards the other side or submission of the other side.
Right. It's an ideology that allows Hamas to exist. It's not the existence of Hamas that makes the conflict continue. So we really need to ask ourselves, what are our options now? The status quo, which has really been our policy for decades. Let's just business as usual, security, some terror attacks here, mowing the lawn in Gaza once in a while. Life goes on. That's really been our policy. The other, as many more now than ever before calling for, is to just get rid of all the Palestinians, like forced removal, ethnically cleanse them, send them elsewhere. That's another option, or find a way to make peace. Seems like out of those three options, one causes the least human harm. So we should generally, when we have different options in front of us, and one clearly causes the least harm to humans, I feel like that's the one we should generally be looking at and putting a lot of energy towards, even if it's hard to comprehend what that looks like and it's not easy to attain. Generally speaking, let's try to find these solutions that don't cause humans harm, right? That doesn't seem like it should be a radical position. Yet when you say that, you're deemed as a radical, or at the very least, you're just laughed at and called naive. What I say, Palestinians at some point will need to accept Israel's right to exist, but Israel will need to transform itself to be a state that Palestinians can accept to exist. Because right now we're asking them to accept someone who they deem as evil, and for good reason. Us to the Palestinians are an evil entity, and they all have dead family members to back up this belief, right? So we need to transform the country, and they need to understand that the country will more than likely remain to exist. So I think that's, if each side is looking at what they can do, there's some internal work and self-transformation that can help bring us both closer to one another. Feel free, either of you, to chime in. We're also going to bring Justin in. Justin, brother, what's up?
Hey Adar, how are you? And Tal, good to see you.
Good to see you, Justin.
Mazel tov for the wedding.
Thank you.
Very happy for you, bro. So I wanted to touch base on two things: the Israeli psychology and the policies of what would be effective against Gaza. And sometimes I try to look at things from an Israeli perspective. I say, okay, what if I was Israeli? And with this war that we have currently going on in Gaza, what makes it very problematic to end the war or to find a solution or a ceasefire, I feel, is that it's really driven by three things. One of them, Netanyahu's wanting to hold on to power as much as possible and to drag it on. I think the longer the war lasts, the better for him. And I even know that his opinion polls, or the opinion polls toward Netanyahu, are actually getting better as the time goes on. He's he's definitely not popular still, but it's definitely better than it was on October 7th and a bit after October 7th. The other thing is that the Israeli mindset, where you have overwhelming support for this war. And there's two things that drive this war, I feel. One of them is the lust for revenge because of October 7th. And the other thing is delusion. there is a serious delusion among the right in Israel that we need to take, and like what Tal had introduced, the policy that looks like we're going forward is occupying northern Gaza and maybe setting up some kind of regime in the southern part of Gaza. This is the delusion of the settlement movement. Because you think about it, if you can do that, where we have an occupation of northern half of Gaza, where you'll have about maybe 500,000 Palestinians because the rest of the population is in the south, we can reestablish the settlements, we can move in, and Israel will be, it'll basically regenerate that. And this is the delusion that is almost like I don't know how to explain this, but like it's this delusion that is running the war, and it's in the speeches of people who are in serious power. And so when you have this lust for revenge and you have this delusional people who are really, really heading the government, it's almost impossible to find a pragmatic, practical solution. Because, how do you talk to people like that? It's like, and the fact you see this even among the soldiers, like what the soldiers do, is taking pictures next to schools being blown up, eradicating, killing. There was a video of soldiers high-fiving each other when they murdered a 76-year-old deaf man, walked into his house and just shot him, and kul hakavod, and they're high-fiving each other. I don't understand how you can deal with a psychology like that. And that's from the Israeli perspective. And then from the Palestinian perspective, I think that we need to address that. Why has Hamas been able to hold power in Gaza? And I will tell you that the siege in Gaza has been the best thing for Hamas, economically speaking. You see, Israel is bent on a military solution. And I think we can understand that there's no military solution. Okay? So put aside the West Bank, put aside the occupation that's been going on for decades, and just deal with what did the siege on Gaza do? It basically destroyed the traditional economics or economic market of the areas where people did trade and borders and things were entered and stuff like that. And what it did was set up a regime that set up tunnels into Egypt, imported stuff under the tunnels, and most of the stuff that comes under the tunnels are not weapons. Actually, they're probably things like soap, food. Even like someone brought in a lion, I think, for the zoo. And Hamas set up a taxing system. So you had Hamas, like Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, is a multimillionaire now. He has Kanafa stores. You know what Kanafa is, right? You guys know what Kanafa is.
Of course, Kanafa is great.
Yeah. He has, you should go to one of his stores. I think he has like 7 outlets in Gaza now. The guy is running a franchise of Kanafa stores. Where did he get the money from? Oh yeah, Sinwar Sweets. It's a huge.
Was that launched since October 7th?
Not since October 7th, of course not.
Okay.
But no. So
Okay.
So Sinwar, and then not just that, but he actually has a conglomerate of businesses in Gaza that his son and his family run. These were built on the taxes that were collected from those tunnel networks. So it's the fact the siege that was meant to destroy Hamas, to curtail their power, has actually made them stronger. And not to mention the fact that Netanyahu, just 3 weeks before October 7th, had his head of Mossad go to Qatar and continue to ask, not for the first time or the second time, but after several times, please continue the money to Hamas, because people are going to say, oh, it was to buy quiet in Gaza. No, it was because Hamas is good for Netanyahu. Hamas is good for the right wing in Israel, because it continues. As long as Hamas is in power, no resolution, no two-state solution, and we can continue what we're doing in the West Bank. And and the problem is, how do you tell this to an Israeli public that is still lusting for revenge for October 7th? Now, do I have sympathy because of October 7th for civilians? Absolutely. But as Israel as a society, I don't have sympathy for them. And I'm going to tell you why. Because October 7th was just one day where we have many events on the Palestinian side. So if they're going to base their entire opinion because of October 7th, hey, buddy, I'm going to go back for the last 5-6 decades and list massacres, including the 1956 massacre when Israel was withdrawing from the war, when President Eisenhower forced Israel to withdraw from that war because the British and the French led that war against Egypt. They massacred. There was a huge massacre in Khan Yunis where they would line up the men. They killed the men, and there was a 13-year-old kid who was protected by his uncle, and the Israelis thought he was dead. He was under his uncle. His uncle died on top of him. I think he was 13 or 15. Okay, the point is that little kid, that 15-year-old kid, his name was Ahmed Yassin, who was the founder of Hamas. They went to the next neighborhood and did the same thing, and the kid, who was, I think, 11 or 13 years old, ran away while his people and the older men were being executed. That guy was Al-Rantisi, the second founder of Hamas. So you can get rid of Hamas. They can disappear. But as long as you have this, you're going to have a new Hamas, something new and something bigger, because there's no political solution and there's no economical solution. And you can have as much military as you want. So other than forced removal, which in every, the right wing, to tell you the truth, I think 70% of Israel would just love the Palestinians to disappear. I honestly believe that. I'm to the point right now where they think if these Palestinians could just go to fucking Egypt, open the border, let them go to Egypt. And I've told them, open the West Bank to them. Bring the 2 million Palestinians to the West Bank. Go finish your job and get rid of Hamas. But no, we can't have that. We can send them to the Sinai Desert, but we can't bring them to their brothers and sisters in the West Bank. This is the mentality that we're dealing with, and it almost makes me feel there's no hope with people like this.
So, thanks for sharing, Justin. Just a question, because you're able to, you lose hope when you see the views of the population, right? But this is the same thing that causes many Israelis to lose hope when it comes to peace with the Palestinians, right? They look at the same thing. They look at how many are radicalized, how many support the October 7th attacks, how many would wish them gone, and they reach a similar conclusion. So this is actually something that both sides have in common, that we have lost hope with peace with the other side, and we give similar reasons for why we've lost hope. It's actually interesting. It's something worth considering. At the end of the day, people are not born hating another side. They're not born evil. It is our environment that makes us this way. So just like I know you very well believe that Palestinians would change given a different environment, well, the same is true for Israelis given a different environment. Israelis are born in a militarized society where they all need to serve, where almost all of us have lost friends in war or terror attacks. Yeah, it's true, we live considerably better lives than Palestinians. We have much more power than them, but we too are raised in an environment which radicalizes us over time. So I think we need to understand this both ways.
I think that's definitely something, but on the other hand, you would have to say, okay, how many times was there periods of quiet? Then the problem is that, like right now, you can say, okay, I can understand Israelis because of October 7th was shocking to them. I can understand why they become radicalized. I can understand October 2nd. And I don't say this, I'm saying this is what Israelis say. Israelis supported peace. And then when the second Intifada came and there was 1,000 Israelis killed in bus bombings and attacks, they changed their mind, it radicalized them. And then when October 7th came, it further radicalized them. So these two events further radicalized Israel's and made them more up to opposition to peace. But on the other hand, hasn't the continuing occupation, I mean, from again, the settlements that went when Oslo was signed, 250 settlers lived in the West Bank. Then in 2000, when the second Intifada happened, it was like 450,000. Today we're at 750,000. So when people, and I see some of the comments here, they're saying that it's always Israel's fault, that Palestinians, blame. I'm going to blame Israel because Israel has conducted this policy. So, for example, if you want to know how Palestinians felt, like those who say, oh, yay, October 7th was an event and they celebrated it, this is the mentality that you have because of what has been continuing. So what you and other Israelis felt on October 7th is what Palestinians feel 364 days of the year. And I hate to say that, it's awful, but you have to look at it from that. And unless you have You know, because here's the thing, it's a fact. When in 2000, if you go to the 1990s, if you go to the 2000s, even 2010s, there were periods of months, years of calm, but nothing happened in the end. We don't see a result. Whether we fight, resist, whether we attack, or whether we have calm and absolutely nothing, the settlements are still being built. The military is still there. Israel's still turning right. So it's like, if there's no changes on the ground, there's no changes in policy, what's the incentive?
So real quick, Anton, I see you want to join. Just give yourself, either turn your camera on or give yourself a thumbnail and we'll bring you on.
Hold on, something I want to say, Justin.
Yeah.
I think that analogy with the 1956, the Khan Yunis massacre, and how Hamas, the leaders of Hamas, the founders, came about from that. It's a great illustration of, I guess, how I'm kind of preaching in the choir here because I'm sure you guys know this, but how policies of Israel did radicalize a generation of Palestinians. Now, I'm certainly willing to acknowledge that. However, something I don't feel comfortable kind of, I guess, lumping in the entire Israeli population or the entire, I guess, military or occupation history of Israel for that necessary. I think it needs to be proportional, because someone like, for example, Yitzhak Rabin, he did have his faults, right? But he was much better and did a lot more to progress the self-determination of Palestinians than anything that Bibi Netanyahu ever did. And there's definitely events in Israel that Adar mentioned, Second Intifada, like the Second Intifada, that was responsible for radicalizing Israelis to an unprecedented amount, and in part you can blame Arafat for that and not taking the deal. So I think it's about proportionality, really.
It's about proportionality, but let me tell you something. When was Yitzhak Rabin assassinated? Do you remember?
Yes, like
November of 1995.
Yeah.
Okay, so November of 1995, he was assassinated at a peace rally in Tel Aviv. Okay, this was a sign, and he was assassinated by an Israeli extremist. And this was a sign that, and I was young at the time, but I do remember those days. Okay, I remember driving through Jerusalem and seeing people standing at the conjunction that goes to Mayal Adumim and then to Shafat and that little intersection there. I remember people holding signs, sitting in the backseat of my parents' car. People holding signs of Yitzhak Rabin in a Hitler uniform with a mustache and doing the Hail Hitler salute. Okay, and you know who was there? With those people holding signs, well, not at that particular place, but around the country, Netanyahu. Netanyahu was there. And even Leah Rabin, the late Leah Rabin, the wife of Yitzhak Rabin, she blamed him because of, if you heard some of the things that we're saying. So the peace process, to say that in the 2000, when the Second Intifada happened, it was clear that the peace process was collapsing when Rabin died, because it became clear that the right in Israel, they did not want it. And then the worst part was, after Rabin died, we had an election. There was an election in Israel, and it was clear that Shimon Peres was going to be the winner. And I think he had 80%. The voting was 80% for Rabin. And this is one thing that I find just very interesting, is that after that, Hamas bombed the bus. This is when actually Hamas started to do those bus bombings in 1990. I believe in 1996. We were now in 1996. So they bombed the bus. Suddenly, Rabin went down to, Peres went down to 70%. They bombed another bus. He went down to 60%. They got to 4 bus bombings until Netanyahu won that election in 1996. And then guess what? For 20 years, they did nothing, almost. Something like 20 years. It was like 15 or 20 years. And even Netanyahu said, since I've been prime minister, there has not been one attack. So I don't know. Don't call me a conspiracy theorist or something.
I don't think there was ever a 20-year period where of quiet.
I think it was like 15 years or something like that. But
there
were
were constant attacks in the 2000s. But
no bus bombings. I'm talking about the bus bombings. But literally, if you look at Hamas's activity, the serious bus bombings happened. And when it gave Netanyahu, hold on, my phone is talking to me. when it gave Netanyahu a victory, it almost seems like it seceded. And the point is that it became clear, and I'm going to say from both sides, not just from one, that the right wing, the extremists on both sides, they killed the peace process. So to say it was the Palestinian leadership or the leadership from the Labor Party, the pragmatic that were trying to usher in an era of peace, a two-state solution, is wrong, because the population, and especially from the Israeli side, they allowed the right wing to come and take over. I mean, that's how I see it.
So
Just a quick thing. I'm just quickly scrolling. There's at least 20 different bus bombings in the early 2000s claimed by Hamas.
yeah, and yeah,
From
that was the second
From the 20,
intifada.
from the second intifada, from the 2000s, 2001,
I
2003.
I think I have my dates wrong. I'm saying, but I'm just from 96 on to the second intifada. I believe that's when you have.
But yeah, so that I think that was like 5 years. We could look what happened in those dates, but
Okay.
Justin, you actually make a great point that it was terror against Israelis which radicalized the Israeli population, right? The radicalized Israeli population.
But if that was the case, you had the assassination of Rabin wouldn't happen. There was, I'm trying to tell you is yes, it did radicalize it, but there was opposition and there was a fear, and it became clear that no Israeli could further advance the Oslo Accord because it would fragment the country. There was a serious opposition against peace.
That's fine, but you know, people in the pro-Israel can't make a similar argument when I say, you know, our actions have radicalized Palestinians. They're like, well, how do you explain the Hebron massacre in 1929? Okay, you know, there's a continuum of how radical a population is. Just because you have had radicals in 94 doesn't mean 94, 95 doesn't mean they're not more radical now. So it's true. There's always been an expansionist element of Israeli society. They've generally been the minority, but constant terror attacks and losing hope in the peace process has radicalized the Israeli population. There have always been radicals in Palestinian society who wanted violence towards Jews. Their numbers have increased significantly because of Israeli actions. So our decisions, our actions towards one another have radicalized each other. I think that's pretty fair.
I think also something, Adar, adding on to it, which is important to say, is that we need to not look at this, again, this falls back into the issue when we talked about Hamas as a symptom and not the cause, as that this conflict has evolved, like the different things that caused fear and pain and suffering. So in 1948 and shortly after, it was the Holocaust that was the main thing, as the fear that once again the Jews would be under attack. And then later on in the after, then, for example, for the Arab side, you had Arab Israelis who were under military occupation from 1948 to 1966. And so that was also a tension that they had, a different type of tension that they had later on after 67, when suddenly you then, beyond just the refugee issue and being under military occupation, being under military rule and then becoming citizens in 1966, then a year later, suddenly you had the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, which put over 1 million people suddenly under your control. And the actual following years after the takeover in 1967 was relatively peaceful. There wasn't that much violence amongst the civilian population, and a lot of this had to do with the tactic that the IDF used was called a enlightened occupation, which is that essentially what it is. They built schools, they built universities, they built things trying to like better the life, to basically shut them up and just be quiet and just be accepting. It was way better than the life that they had under the Jordanian and Egyptian occupations, and so it was better for them. But then towards, as you said, what happened later on is that their lives just weren't improving. Israel wasn't changing anything for them. And so they were just constantly under this occupation. I know from my family members, for example, they would freely travel to West Bank and go to different Palestinian shops and stores. It was a completely different time than what we understand today of what the West Bank used to look like. And your family probably told you this as well, in terms of like the connections between Israelis and Palestinians. But then when things didn't change and there was economic upheaval in Israel, and then that also laid onto the Palestinian population that, you know, Israel put them second because they weren't citizens, then they suffered the brunt of that. And so that's when the uprising started. The first intifada started, and then it only got worse later on between different populations. But also, it's not when you talk about with legitimacy, you don't have to go through 30 attacks or one attack to make it legitimate for you to hate the other side. I mean, I know how I felt when my loved ones were almost killed in a terror attack. Like, I know the fear and the hatred that I felt after that. It doesn't take 30 of those to make me then want to hate the other side. All it can take is one. It can take 30. And a lot of the Palestinians, as Adar said early on in the stream, have lost loved ones as well. And it makes complete sense that, for example, most Gazans would hate me and who I am because of what I represent, because all they know about me is Israel, the IDF, and a fighter jet flying over their house and bombing it to smithereens, and half of their family being killed. And I understand their hatred towards me. I understand where they're coming from in that regard. But the same thing can, from a different perspective, me being raised in Israel, my entire upbringing was that, not that I have to join the IDF in order for the great nation of the Jewish people, but honestly was that you need to fight, because if you don't, we're going to be killed. We're going to be massacred. We're going to be destroyed. And so that's also something in every single Israeli Jew's psyche, and the way that they're brought up is in this constant fear of what's going to happen the day that they put their weapons down. Well, whether or not that's legitimate or that's the right way to go about in society is a completely different question. And it causes a lot of harm that we now are seeing today with how a lot of Israelis react to a lot of the videos that are being posted by IDF soldiers. But it's a narrative, it's a thing. And, for the past generation, your generation, I think it would be, the second Intifada and what happened to Palestinians, and that was then. For my generation, it is October 7th what'll follow my kids and what they will hear about what happened years ago, when we were suddenly getting better. There's also a misconception amongst a lot of, I think, Israelis. This is on my side as an Israeli, of everything was fine before October 6th. We were all friendly, everything was nice, and then October 7th happened. And again, isolating the conflict to Gaza as if there's not a regional issue going on here with the Palestinians and what has happened in the West Bank in the past few years. I mean, a lot of Israelis have no clue just how fucked up the West Bank is on a day-to-day basis between Israelis and Palestinians there.
I want to bring in Anton and a Jewish ANCAP just because they've been very patient.
Sure. But my point is just simply that I think that there's different degrees of pain, and we can always argue about who has suffered more, but it doesn't matter whether or not you suffered 30 or I suffered 1. Even that one attack can radicalize me all the way to hate your side. And so I think that we must understand the other side's hatred towards one another, where that arrives from, because maybe we can start a discussion from that point onward. But it doesn't matter to say that, you've only lost 2 family members and I only lost 1, because at the end of the day, we both lost family members.
Mm-hmm. And I just I'm bringing Anton and Jewish ANCAP on, but I do want to point out to something that happened at the very beginning, where Justin joined a Palestinian and said Mazal Tov on getting married to Tal in Israeli. So let's just take a moment and appreciate how beautiful that is.
Actually, that's the second time. He actually, me and Tal are in contact through WhatsApp, and I reached out to him about something else, or he reached out to me. I can't remember. And he said, I'm busy. I'm getting married in 2 days. So that was the second time.
Yeah, so it's beautiful. And I want us to just be able to appreciate this moment. And just, I'll give another, example. I messaged our friend Muhammad from Gaza, who's been on the show multiple times, just to see how he's doing. And I say, how are you? He goes, still doing okay. How are you? Like, the fact that, look, I'm living a good life, The fact that he would even turn it around on me and try to see how I'm doing just shows a level of care that was beautiful, So yeah, there's these connections happening. Clearly not enough, but let this give us a glimmer of hope of what's possible. All right, Anton, thanks for joining us. What's going on?
Yeah, sure. No, it's been really interesting listening for the last while. I'm Anton. I'm tuning in from London, but I'm from the States. I grew up in Germany. Jewish, so it's certainly been an interesting discussion to listen in on. And something I've been picking up on today is how we talk about Rabin versus Netanyahu, really. And when we think Rabin, he really is held up as this model of the peace bringer, the one who was the most reasonable and who was ready to negotiate in good faith with Arafat. And then his assassination, which, especially now we're 5 days before Rabin was assassinated, Ben-Gvir, who we now see as national security minister, was running around with the hood ornament from his car saying, we'll get him next. And then that ushered in pretty soon after 2 years of Netanyahu's first stint in office. But I think that one thing we were missing, I feel like, was Ehud Barak, who I personally think was arguably the most dovish Israeli leader in 99, 2000 when he was pushing the two-state solution. And Bill Clinton famously was saying to Arafat, you know, he didn't come back with a counteroffer, you've ruined your people. I don't remember the exact quote. But it just made me think about how Palestinian leadership, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush here, or largely Arab leadership before and continuing after the 48 war was selling to their audience and to their population this idea that Israel can be undone. Because when you look at speeches, you look at Hashemi Husseini, you look at Nasser, Arafat, Hamas now, they all are selling pretty much the same idea, which clearly has not worked over the last 75 or so years, almost a century. So I was doing some digging, and Anwar Sadat, during the 1973 war, when Nixon started flowing supplies into Israel, he had a call with, I believe it was Leonid Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union, saying, you need to send troops, we need help, Israel's kicking our asses. And Brezhnev responded, we've sent you so much ammunition, we've sent you supplies, you keep saying you're going to defeat Israel, and every time you fail at it, I am not letting my men die. 6 years later, Sadat is shaking hands with Menachem Begin. He gets the Sinai back. This marks a real change. Sadat pays with his life for this, and Begin is one of, I believe, 2 leaders who shows up to Sadat's funeral. And I wonder, to which extent can we blame Palestinian leadership for selling a certain delusion, honestly, of what the end result of the suffering and the death that their population has very much experienced for 75 years?
Yeah, I'll leave it to the chat to or to the panel to respond. But I think you bring up a great point, Anton. Anybody want to chime in? Okay, I'm happy to. Look,
I mean, I can give him a Palestinian response to that.
Sure, yeah.
Please.
Yeah, well, there's a website if you want to take a look at it. It's called Shaul Arieli. He's an Israeli analyst, and he actually is one of the few people that actually shows maps. And I like that because maps really show you the picture. And I know that this argument is that it's been delusional for what they accept Palestine. Let me tell you something. First of all, your notion of political speeches about what Arafat said and what he would say in speeches and stuff. Even Ishaq Rabin would say, Jerusalem is forever the eternal and complete capital of Israel, and we're never going to give it up. He used to say this after Oslo all the time. He never, in any of his speeches, ever said Jerusalem will be a shared capital between Israel and Palestine. Now, what people say in political speeches is very different from their policies. Was his intention to divide Jerusalem? We don't know. But he never said it publicly that he supports a two-state solution with Jerusalem as the capital. I believe they used to float the idea that Abu Dis, which is very east of Jerusalem, would be the capital and would be called Al-Quds. So I wouldn't go so far for the speeches. The other thing is that although there's been proposals and Camp David, the Camp David summit or meetings between that Arafat so-called, I think they called it the generous offer is what they called it. Look at the maps. I mean, I wish we could show you pictures of it because I'm looking at it right now. You have Palestine divided into about 5 pieces of divided land surrounded by areas annexed by Israel. And he looked at it and said, okay, how could this, this is a solution that if I sign, it's going to be a permanent solution. So if you have Palestine that has no border with Jordan, divided into 5 pieces of land, and in between, you have areas annexed by Israel. Some of it, even they said temporary, which, long-term lease is actually the term that they used. It wasn't a practical solution. I don't think that Camp David was the solution. And I even heard reports that 95% of the West Bank was offered. But look at the map. The map tells you the truth. And this is a map done by an Israeli person who was in the government at the time. So we're always been close. I think, yes, we have been close. But we've just never gone far enough, because here's the thing. Palestinians have to be careful when they accept a peace proposal with Israel, because it's going to be a permanent one, and it's going to put them in a binding solution. And it's going to be, how is a state going to exist, be able to have free movement, trade, continuity, and things like that. These are very important to Palestinians. Airspace, for example, access to water, and all of this, and every single proposal that has been proposed has always denied those fundamental rights to Palestinians.
Well, I don't want to. Here's the thing with, sort of kind of blaming, this Israeli or this Palestinian leader. That's sort of, it's relevant. It's relevant for the context of the conflict, certainly. But we can go through all down that road. But what I want to actually bring up to everybody is that there is a particular opportunity for, I guess, most of us here on this panel and most likely in the chat are Israeli citizens, and we can influence our government, despite us being in small numbers, like peace-minded Israelis. I do believe that right now, and pretty much every time, we need to really rally us up. We need to organize. We need to participate, in groups like Standing Together, that advocate for Jewish-Palestinian unity, and we also need to, whenever the elections come around, Gans said this September, but I highly doubt it. But whenever they do come around, we all need to rally people to vote for Avodah, which is the Labor Party, Meretz, or Chadash. Those are probably the ones that would focus a lot on peace, depending on what your brand of peace is. And this is kind of the only way I see things getting better. And I see, when I see commentators, especially leftist commentators, say, what do we do? And we just say, donate to Palestine. The only thing they say is like donate to Palestinian charities. Now, that's I completely advocate full-heartedly advocate for donating to Palestinian charities. However, it's a very liberal solution, just because it's like kind of like a band-aid solution. It doesn't fix the systemic problems that face Palestinians. But if we want to fix problems that face Palestinians, we absolutely need to participate in Israeli electoralism, get this far-right government out, and have elections as soon as possible.
Yeah, agreed. And Anton, just to also respond to your question, I think that, peace with Egypt was an example of, I think it's actually the only example of a country giving back territory not during war, which also really speaks to Israel's willingness to compromise, and this whole idea that we're just expansionist till death do us part and we just want to conquer all the land. I think that really shows that is not the case, and that there are situations where we will give back land if we see that it will give us lasting peace. I think that was good proof of that.
Sorry for interrupting, but on top of that, there was also Ariel Sharon in 2005, where he thought that, which was like a fairly hasty decision from what I read, where he was like, okay, we're just going to give back the Gaza Strip.
Well, that was unilateral. That was the difference. Sharon pulled out, but yeah, we did it in Gaza as well, but that was a unilateral pullout. It didn't come with the peace agreement, and that's why it didn't work out well. It shouldn't have been.
And actually, the Palestine Authority actually was against it. And even Saeb Erekat even told Sharon, do not do this, because when there was a unilateral pullout, he said that Gaza, the resistance in Gaza, Hamas at the time, would say, hey, look, negotiations didn't get them to pull out and remove their settlers. It was resistance. And the PA said, do it through negotiations. And Sharon said, no, I'm going to do it unilaterally, because Sharon was pushing a managed occupation rather than a settlement.
Interesting.
And there was the other issue where, you get this debate quite frequently about that election that happened in 2006, I believe, between Fatah and Hamas, and where some people who are in the very anti-Israel wing will say, well, Hamas won by a supermajority, and that makes them the sole legitimate representatives of the Palestinians, whereas I think that they only won a plurality of the votes. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's about 40%. They lost. I think they won something like 40%, and they were able. It's interesting because even from what I understand, they had a coalition. It was a coalition that they were able to form, and some of them were actually leftists that joined them. They were actually like communists, for example, joined them. So they've never won a majority.
Is that the PFLP or was it something?
I believe it was the Democratic Front.
Right.
And I even believe that they even had some. Yeah.
Justin, real quick, because Tal needs to go, so I just want to give him an opportunity to say a final word.
Sure.
Yeah, it was lovely speaking with all you guys. I really
Good to
appreciate
see you,
the
bro.
time. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll do this
Take
next week,
care.
hopefully.
Thanks for joining, Tal.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, you were saying, Justin.
Yeah, I was saying that they were never able to, like I said, they were never able to win a majority. I don't know if that's the case now. Again, because many people use this thing that say, well, if there was an election today, Hamas would win. And again, it would be like, I think that an election when people are traumatized, even like Israelis right now, I think Israelis right now would make very bad decisions in the polls because you don't ask the public their opinion during their times of trauma. You need to do it. You need to do it after you see some significant changes on the ground, changes in people's lives, and people say, you know what? I think we can go forward. Things are calming down. Things are getting better. Let's continue.
I'm going to have to go soon as well because we're rolling into Shabbat here in London. But I was recently listening to Peter Beinart do one of his things on his Substack, and he was talking about, well, Israel has to release Marwan Barghouti from prison, who was a secularist, who I think there was some car bombing attack that he ended up getting arrested and convicted for, and that would somehow sway him because he had, during his incarceration, swayed to more moderate or nonviolent methods of resistance and supported negotiations. So I don't know if anyone has any insight to give on that.
Yeah, he seems to be the most popular Palestinian leader today, and if he really is became a moderate, I think it might be wise for Israel to release him and have him be kind of like the Nelson Mandela, who gets released from prison and helps achieve.
He actually ran for. He was actually about to run for president when the last election was almost about to take place, and he had his wife sit in for him. And he's a very popular force in Palestinian politics. I support him, by the way, 100%. I would love to see him as Palestine president because for two things. He is, like I said, his acts of resistance, I don't think makes him a terrorist. I think at the time he was fighting a war. His positions, I don't think his positions have changed much. You may say he's become modernized, but he's always been a two-state solution person. He's always been supporter of a voice for a settlement with Israel, and he's even gone further into it. The other thing is that he is a threat to the oligarchy right now that are ruling the Palestinian Authority. They actually, to tell you the truth, I think they're more scared of him than Israelis are, and he's definitely a threat to Hamas because even Hamas knows that Marwan. You see, the solution is so easy. Marwan al-Barghouti can bring a unified Palestinian political force that will include all the factions and everybody, and it will sideline Hamas and sideline the Palestinian Authority right now. That's many of who are corrupt and making money off of this cooperation with Israel. So, but again, it's a solution, but it's something that I feel like sometimes people don't want a solution. They just want it to continue.
Anton, before you go, I want to make one more point about the leadership because you asked how responsible is Hamas or Palestinian leadership for just not accepting any deals, and I think hindsight is 20/20, and if Palestinians could go back, I think they would have accepted multiple deals, seeing where the rejection has led them. But I think an interesting point is it's unclear who influences who more. Does the leader influence the public or does the public influence the leader? Right. And I think it's actually both to an extent. I think every leader wants to remain in power. In order to remain in power, especially in a democracy, they need to be popular. They need to say certain things. So I think that this is part of what has influenced Palestinian leadership. It's they didn't want, and even if it wasn't them getting elected out of office. It's just an uprising against them and for them to be like lynched, right? So there's still fear for Palestinian leaders losing power if they take too radical of a position, contrary to what the Palestinian population believes. So it's almost like this balancing act. I do think leaders could influence the population. They just can't take too far a stance that's too far from what they believe. They need to slowly shift them through like making compelling cases and giving them hope at a better future. So I think there's this balancing act, and both leaders and populations are influencing each other.
So, and there also has to be, there's certain red lines. There's certain red line. Oh, he had to go, but
We lost.
I just sent you a picture of the map from the 2020 proposal.
Yeah, he wrote he had to go. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. But
yeah,
and I'm just and I kind of disagree with you. I don't think the Palestinians would accept this today because it kind of looks similar to what the Trump plan was. The Trump plan and how it, and actually the Trump plan actually gave more territory to Gaza.
They would have agreed to the 47 partition plan.
Oh, the 47, that's a different story.
Yeah,
but the thing is, it's comfortable for me and you to say that in 2024. But imagine if you were,
2020.
yeah. I mean, if you know, I can say, hey, I should have bought Bitcoin like what 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Okay, yeah. Now we know that it was, you know, a few $100s, and today it's like, I don't even know how much it's worth now.
Like 60. I actually.
Is it? Wow. Okay. Anyways,
I bought it at 2,000. Believe it or not.
Okay, so okay, I should have been in Adar. Okay, but you know, but anyway, I can't say that now. I could have, would have, should have.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with investing. No matter how.
Hey,
I didn't buy nearly enough because at 2,000, I'm like, no, there's no way it's going up that much more. So you know, I put in a little. And
there's a Yiddish expression. I'm gonna have somebody teach it to me in Yiddish. Remember that Eddie Murphy movie, The Distinguished Gentleman? Do you remember that movie?
Oh no, I know. I thought you were describing Eddie Murphy as a distinguished gentleman.
No. He did a film called The Distinguished Gentleman where he runs he runs for Congress, and then an old Jewish woman tells him in Yiddish something in Yiddish, or he actually says something to her in Yiddish, and she laughs. He's like, "What did you say?" He said, "Well, if my grandmother had balls, she'd be my grandfather." and I guess it's an old Yiddish like, you know, thing to say, like, well, yeah, coulda, woulda, shoulda, right?
Right. That so now we're on a different topic now, but let me share a thought here. And you know, as it says Israel Palestine, U.S. elections, and more. We can talk about whatever we want. So when it comes to like investing and trading, the only way you're not going to be consistently upset is if you have like a method, if you're disciplined. So there's a way in which you invest or trade where there's like a method in which you do it. So let's say you make certain gains, you pull some out because you didn't actually make any money until you pull some out. So people have different methods in how they trade and how they invest. But when you're methodical with it, you're not leaving it up to your own emotion and how you feel at a certain given moment. So even if you don't make the best trade at a given moment, you're still following a certain formula that will leave you, so you won't be bummed out. When I started, and I don't do any like day trading. I used to. I would always lose. I just didn't know what the fuck I was doing. But now I hold some currencies, and some stocks. But I would constantly be upset because I'm like, oh damn! If I bought a little earlier or sold a little earlier, it literally took a toll on my mental health because I was constantly feeling upset that I didn't make the right trade. And I was doing it based on emotion. I'm like, oh, this coin's going up. Let me buy now. And then it drops 50% the next day. I'm like, damn, I just, lost all this money because there wasn't a formula I was following. So just a tip, either give your money to somebody who's a professional, let them do it, or really understand what your formula is and go based on a formula and not just don't trade based on a whim because you'll constantly be upset about it. You'll never sell at the top. You'll never buy at the bottom. You'll always be off by some amount. Don't let it take a toll on your well-being because money is not the most important thing in this world. David Bow got to go. Thanks, Adar, for bringing both sides together. Thank you for your support, David. See you next time. Anyways, that's our little intermission on trading. But Jewish Handcap, what's up? Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
What's going on? You want to say something? We are going to wrap it up soon. So
Yeah, I know it's been a long one. I would you posted a couple of months ago a clip with Zach Corner, and I thought he summarized it pretty well when he said, if you can think of the idea of better to die as a free man than to live as a slave, you get into the Palestinian psyche of that for them living in peace, whether it be two states or one state, is slavery. And I thought, like, a lot of times we get so caught up in, like, was this map okay? Was this prime minister sincere? Was this leader okay? And it's all fluff. It's all beating around the bush. And I think you need to really get into the psyche of each side to understand what's really going on and what's motivating them. And the fact that Hamas could go and pull off what it did on October 7th, and knew that it was going to put its population into such perilous, counterattack from Israel, and they did it knowingly, means that they are prepared to sacrifice. And this is an ideological war. This is not just about, oh, we need to end the blockade, we need to end this and that. They had billions and billions of dollars of aid going in, coming in every year. And trust me, I've read up on the history of this 100-year war, and I know that there's 100 different grievances that the Palestinians have, which are totally legit. But the end of the day is that you can tell that this is an ideological war, and it's not going to be settled by a real estate negotiation of, like, I'm going to move the line here, you're going to move the line there, and then suddenly we're going to all live kumbaya. The ideological side of the Palestinians, for sure, is we're going back to 1948. Every single time they say that every single part of Israel is stolen land. Yes, 67 is just a negotiating tactic to go and say, well, here we know for sure that this is going to be, even today, it's considered occupied Palestinian land, and even the Israelis have not kind of like claimed it for themselves. So therefore, this is definitely where the launching pad and where the international community would give us a foothold. But nobody has said that that would be the final thing. Even the Hamas charter that you read the other week, says that, like, even if the technical thing, we accept the Palestinian votes, we don't give up any of the other things of going back for the refugees, for continued struggle. So this is an ideological war, and it's not going to end by moving a line on the map here or there. And I just think every time we have this discussion, it just goes around in circles trying to go and say, oh, if Bibi Netanyahu is not there, or if Shimon Peres were there, Yitzhak Rabin or Yasser Arafat, it doesn't really make a difference who's there. This is an ideological trend. And I think that's why I agree with you, Adar, that either confederation or federal system will actually be the only thing that will work, because both sides believe that they do not want to go and split Jerusalem. They're not ready to go and flood themselves with refugees. Yeah, there's just no negotiation on these core issues. So I think I said it to Justin last time that the land negotiations is the easiest part, because you can go and maneuver this line over here and maneuver that line over there. But the real core things, Jerusalem, refugees, and all those other things, those are impossibilities to overcome. And therefore, I think two-state solution is never going to happen.
Well,
and
here's the thing.
Palestinians prove it.
If you want to okay, I really do agree with what you're saying, but I'm asking you to look at it from a different point of view. Because if you look at it just drawing a line, for example, Gaza, Israel withdrew in Gaza. Israel withdrew in Gaza in 2005, right? Or 2006, right? But the thing is that it could be easy. We could say, okay, this is Palestine and this is Israel and everybody this. But if you create a situation where a Palestinian state like Gaza, for example, the siege, no port, no airport, really, really restricted to waterways. Fishermen cannot go out certain amount of kilometers from the coast. The border, intense border and things like that. If you're going to create that kind of state, yes, absolutely, you're never going to destroy the ideology. That's why I said there's military, political, and economic solutions. If you have a military solution, it's not going to work. You can have a political solution, but if a political solution comes without an economic solution, then I don't care what kind of people, whether they be Palestinians, whether they be Muslims, whether they be Catholics or Buddhists or whatever, it won't work. And therefore, there's two approaches: continue the status quo, which we obviously see is not working. Okay, because you're going to continue to have hate grow, violence grow, and massacres and wars and terror attacks, etc. Or you have to change the reality on the ground. You have to have a political solution, one that doesn't see Palestinians losing their land, and you have to have some sort of mechanism or thing that's going to say, okay, develop your economy. Because once I see my economy doing better, once my life is getting better, guess what? I'm not going to care anymore about these other ideological things. Ideology will be replaced with, I'm living a good life, I'm giving a better life, I want to take care of my family, I want to educate my kids, I want to grow my business, and things like that. If you don't have that element...
I fundamentally disagree with that assessment, because the Palestinians in Gaza prove exactly the opposite of what you're saying. They were prepared to go and make their lives 100 times worse than it was prior to October 7th.
Listen, I don't subscribe. I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to this thing that Gaza could have been a Singapore. Singapore could not exist without a port, without an airport, without free access of people and goods and products. It's impossible. I don't know what economy.
That's not what he's saying.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that all the gripes that the Gazans have about being blockaded and so much little amount of ability to go and maneuver is all not just. I'm just saying the fact that they were prepared to go and make the life that they have now so much misery, knowing that would happen by doing October 7th, drives me to believe that the conclusion is that this is not a community or a psyche in the Palestinian mind, that they are prepared, that they were prepared to bring themselves so much suffering.
That's not correct. That's not correct. If you look at there was a poll done, I think 3 weeks before October 7th. And they asked Palestinians about the at the time, what was the what they call the Hudna, and over 65% of the populations that was polled supported continued Hudna even under the current conditions that existed at that time. So and we want to talk about the Palestine. Hudna was the agreement that after 2021 that was made, where Israel allowed something like 15,000 people to go work inside Israel from Gaza. They allowed better access to products and the border control and lack of lack of restrictions on the border with Egypt, where things were able to come back and forth and things like that. They actually did see an improvement based on even people that I speak to in Gaza. They even saw it. The point is, when economic things happened, the general population were in favor and actually were more supportive, because they were more motivated. They were more motivated by those than this whole ideological things.
And things were getting better according to
things were getting better, but not good. But not good.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
who is they? Dude, who is they?
The entire Gaza population.
So the whole entire Gaza population, you think actually like where I mean, I don't know, you're lumping in the Hamas to the whole entire population.
Did Hamas fly in from Mars and take over the Gaza population? And I'm not part of the Gaza population.
I think what Jewish ANCAP, what you're saying is that the majority of the Gaza population support October 7th, even in hindsight, even knowing how much misery it's caused them and how much death.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Well, I mean, that's what the polling currently shows, right?
Sure.
I don't know how you're going to do a polling.
I'm saying
I don't know how you're going to do a polling in Gaza right now. I don't know how. And these polls that are telling me.
All you have to do is take a look at the last 18 years since Israel pulled out of Gaza, and 2008, 2012, 2014, just constant misery happening every single time Hamas went and tried to attack Israel. And it just made their lives miserable. The fact that they continue to go and do this means that they are prepared to continue having this misery on them. Okay. And I don't believe that you can go and just say Hamas is just like this Mars type aliens that just flew in.
It's not the Mars type alien, but you're trying to
they
basically
are part of the
say
Palestinian
that the entire
people.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is you're trying to say that they're
everybody in the Fatah and Hamas.
We need to wrap it. We need to wrap it up. Right. So each of you can have a final thought. Try to give your final thought in a way that doesn't absolutely trigger somebody else on the panel, so we don't feel the need for this to continue. So try to have it be a final thought that is somewhat reconciliatory.
Well, I wanted to let Justin get the floor because he does a very fine analysis of the situation. But let me I guess kind of contribute my thoughts very briefly. So we have to remember that Palestinians in Gaza are not like one single coherent monolith. It would be, I wrote in the chat, it would be like saying to make that claim that like all like the all or all of the Gazans contributed to October 7th by not, I guess, stopping or not being like fully in support, by not, I guess, contributing to the support. It'd be like saying like all Americans support Trump or all Americans support Bibi just because they were in power and they did the actions that they did during their rule. But the reality is we live in, I guess, the 21st century, and it's very difficult for citizens to have an uprising and dissent against, and especially with the centralization of power, it's difficult for citizens to, I guess, revolt against the state. And so Hamas is able, through I guess their control of Gaza, is able to keep dissent keep dissent in control, and reduce it. So basically, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that the Gazan population are too radicalized, they're too sympathetic to Hamas, they're too sympathetic to an ideology of violent extremism to be negotiated with. But what we need to understand is that things like, I guess, promising a certain line on the map, things like promising aid, things like building a better economic life, this is what de-radicalizes Gaza. This is what this is the true way to defeat Hamas. And so that's something I wish that new Israeli leadership would focus on entirely. So yeah, as it is my final, I guess, my final segment, I'll say that I'm Social Surrealist. I have a YouTube channel that is Social Surrealist. I'll link it in the chat. And I made a few videos, and please feel free to check them out. And thank you for letting me on this panel, Adar.
For sure. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next time. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I think my general overview is basically that the idea that economic development or any of this stuff is going to change the psyche of the Palestinian mind about how this thing is going to come to an end is being spoken. It's almost like the two-state solution. You can hear from decade after decade after decade, every prime minister thinking that if we just go and raise their living standards, if we just go and do a little bit more this, then they'll drop their thing. And it's foolish. It's not realizing that the belief system in the Palestinian mind and as well in the Israeli mind, I agree, it's two national identities battling out of what they believe is rightfully, theirs. And you speak with Palestinians and you hear them say in their own words that basically this is not about the 67 borders. Every single part of Israel, 1948, is stolen land, is stolen Palestinian land. And that's why they never even accepted 47. But like I said, I don't like going into like 100 details about like this peace deal or that peace deal. It's wasting your time not looking at the bigger picture. If you listen to how the Palestinian, even in the West Bank, I listened the other day to Salam Fayyad, and I listened to all these other people. They all say that Hamas is part of the Palestinian people. So the idea and the notion that Hamas is kind of like keeping the Gazan population just captive. They're like this terrorist organization that if only the 2 million people of Gaza could break free from them, then they would just be eliminated and Fatah would just go and dominate and be the moderate. It's not true at all. The Palestinian people see Hamas as integral, as part of their entire ideology. Yes, some of them are leading towards non-violent tactics, and Hamas is for violent tactics, but they're part of the Palestinian psyche of we do not accept Israel in any shape or form. And what you said that, making their lives better during the time of when Israel was allowing people to come in and out, I forget what the terminology you used was, the fact that they continued with October 7 shows that they are prepared to go and sacrifice their own people and the Palestinians in the West Bank didn't come out and say, "Oh my gosh, the Hamas is just crazy people and they did the most terrible thing." No, they support it, and therefore, it's try not to go and understand my statement as saying every single Palestinian is a terrorist. Obviously, that's not my opinion. I'm just saying the psyche of the Palestinians is this land belongs to us in its entirety, every single bit of it. And you Israelis are on stolen land and you're expansionist, and we're not going to accept you in any way, shape, or form. And that's just unfortunately the reality. And therefore, when we come to that terms that this is what we're dealing with, then we can go and say, okay, finally, I get it. It's not a two-state solution because that's not going to work. We're going to have to figure out a way how to live together without making each other miserable. And that's going to be through a confederation or a federation or some type of way that everybody has access to every part of the land, and nobody is going to think that they're going to go and push someone else out and be exclusive. That's my final wrap.
Thank you, Jewish ANCAP. Justin, floor is yours.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's like I'm gonna say the same thing. Basically that, here's the thing. It's like, okay, when Salam Fayyad is probably going to be one of the most moderate Palestinians you're going to meet in your life. And he just, brought up that name. That was he was the former prime minister who was very technocratic economic guy who actually did a lot of economic changes in the West Bank. And he's actually one of the people in the Fatah movement right now that's actually pushing for some really serious reforms. And one of those reforms is to broaden the PLO to include Hamas, because in the end, Hamas is part of the Palestinian people. It is. I mean, we can't say it. And it would be to say like Palestine without Hamas would be like, say, Israel without I don't know, Likud, or without what's his name, Ben Gavir's party, Otzma Yehudit, for example. So, you do have these elements. They're always going to be there. Unfortunately, we can't, basically like bomb all our opponents. Maybe if that could be a good solution, but again, fortunately, it's not a practical one. And, the whole thing is that I use history as an example, and I use society. The whole notion that, well, Palestinians are never going to accept, but let's look at the fragmented Palestinian society. You look at people in Gaza, they tend to be more radical, but they face the worst conditions. And I'm not talking about now, but I'm talking about even before. So then you go to who's in the second worst condition, those who live in the West Bank. And you see less violence from Palestinians in the West Bank because economics in the West Bank, opportunity in the West Bank is better than those of Gaza. They have access to jobs. They have access to an economy. They have more free border from the West Bank. You can go to Jordan very easily. Things like that. And then third, you have the Palestinians in Jerusalem who are not citizens, but they have residency. They have rights. They can travel free and things like that. And then you have the 2.2 million Palestinians that are residents or citizens of the state of Israel. So if what Jewish ANCAP is saying is correct, why isn't the majority of the Palestinians? There is 7.5 million Palestinians that live under Israeli rule. Only 2.3 million are in Gaza. The rest of the 5 million are through other parts of the country. So if what he's saying is true, why aren't the Israelis in the Galilee? Why aren't they up in arms launching missiles at Jewish neighborhoods or attacking Jewish neighborhoods and things like that? Why aren't the Palestinians in Jerusalem leading the militants and things like that? And why do we see less in the West Bank? So I think you really have to kind of reanalyze what you're saying, because it's almost, to tell you the truth, it's almost borderline racism that, these Palestinians just have a mentality. They just want war and blood and this. It's really a little, I don't think, political solution with an economic solution is the only way.
Please don't ad hominem. I'm not calling anybody names. I was not calling anybody racist or anything like that.
Yeah, but your whole notion that these people are accepting. Listen, buddy. Palestine, from the river to the sea, we will always see it as Palestine, just the way Israelis see it as Israel. And it's going to take generation, and it's going to take a lot of maneuvering and a lot of things that have to be done for societies to accept both people on both sides. But it's not going to be done through the current status quo or through Israel dominating over a Palestinian. Even if there was a two-state solution, it would mean nothing. If Israel was in total control of Palestinian lives, their borders, and their movement, it would mean nothing.
Totally agree. We're on the same page.
There we go. That's a great note to end it on. And I know there's definitely a lot more to talk about. If you all want, we can set up another session, even for just the two of you, if you'd like to go deeper on this. Thank you all for joining. We will be
So-
back.
Could Social Serialist just put a plug in for his site, because I looked for it on YouTube and I didn't find it.
Yeah, you'll see. Well, you just click the comment. You know, he
Oh.
commented. So if you click his name, it should take you to his site.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And yeah, thank you all. We'll be back next week for another stream. I don't know what kind of stream it'll be. Maybe another Chatterday Night Live. Maybe we'll do one-on-one interview. We'll see. I do have some interesting guests I want to bring on at some point. Just waiting for scheduling. And yeah, stay safe, everybody. Sending you all love.